It was an ordinary warm summer day, similar to thousands of other such days. The city lived its slow life. Wanting to quench his thirst and drown out his emotional weakness, a little Andy opens another can of beer. Andy took a whole bag of this goodness, so you can afford to drink a few jars, while enjoying the beauty of the city. Having taken the first sip, the hero feels that he has become much lighter, and the beginnings of vital energy have appeared in him. His pleasure was interrupted by a notification that came on his mobile phone. He was waiting for this notification, because he was supposed to be informed about the result of his job interview, for which he had been preparing for a long time. However, the company refused to employ the hero. This is the second attempt this year to get a job somewhere. This fact ruined Andy's mood, which he had so diligently raised with the help of several cans of alcohol. But to be honest, he expected to see such a result, because he is just an ordinary loser, and this is not the first attempt to change something in his life. Therefore, he simply continues to drink in order to somehow soothe the emotional pain in his chest. Having finished another can of beer, the hero takes his bag and goes home to continue his useless existence there. The hero is in no hurry to go home and slowly drags his feet up the stairs in order to somehow brighten up his gray days. When he gets home, the first thing he does is check to see if his front door is locked, and then unlocks it. Beforehand, he carefully looks through the peephole of his door, fearing that the landlady of the apartment might come to visit him. But fortunately, she wasn't here today, so the hero can spend his next great evening here. And he casually throws his phone on the sofa, because today, he received only negative things from him. From the push of the phone, a strange bag with a pill bounced off the furniture. Walking into the house, Andy sat down on his bed, preparing to open another can of alcohol. As always, he thinks a lot about his life, but he cannot imagine how to change it. Therefore, lately, he can just sit and think for days on end, because a huge number of problems have accumulated. The hero sees the only solution in this situation in drinking a large amount of alcohol in order to somehow forget. On his desk, there is nothing but an empty box of cheap processed foods and a box of unknown medicine. But fortunately, the hero doesn't need anything else. He's used to leading such a lifestyle. The main thing is to find money to pay rent. At times, he experiences bouts of sadness, and the hero considers himself a pathetic loser. After all, if you look at it, now he saves on everything, just to allow himself to lose himself in the evening over another can of alcohol. From everything that happens, Andy begins to have a mental disorder that he is unable to control. Attacks of melancholy give way to attacks of aggression, and he turns around his table with alcohol. Having done this, Andy realizes that he now has nothing to drink, which upsets him even more. He grabs his head and goes through all the options in his thoughts when he made a mistake, and why he found himself in such a situation. Andy feels very sorry for himself. He blames the world around him for not allowing him to reveal his talents and get a job, and this brings tears to his eyes. But still, he understands that all is not lost and tries to calm down in order to think about further options. Wiping his snot with his sleeve, Andy sees on the table the only chance to change his life. There was an unusual pill called AF12, which he received as a participant in a special clinical experiment. When Andy said that he did not sign up for this, the person who gave him the medicine replied that when his financial difficulties reached their peak, he would take this pill himself. However, Andy decided to wait a little, and the next day he went to his part-time job. It was warm summer weather and Andy, dressed as a cute cat, was selling himself to small children for a nominal fee. Of course, there were few clients, but this money allowed Andy to buy alcohol for himself, and even sometimes pay for housing. But such work greatly exhausted him, because the city in which he lives is southern, and the weather is always sunny here. Sitting down on a bench to catch his breath, Andy hears his phone ringing. This call gave the hero a ray of hope, because this could be one of the companies to which he sent his resume. However, it was the owner of the apartment. She told the hero that the amount of rent debts had exceeded all limits, and if he did not pay, he would be evicted. Not knowing how to solve this problem, Andy decided to turn to his mother, who owns a small store in the slums of the city. But having accidentally overheard her conversation, the hero hears that the family is now making ends meet, and the store will most likely go up for sale. And he understands that now is not the time to burden his mother with his problems, especially on her birthday. The hero, of course, did not forget about this, because he values his parents very much, and took a small cake with him as a gift. But not wanting to be seen by his mother in such a pitiful state, the hero decides to leave it on the table so as not to hurt his mother again. After which Andy leaves, wondering where else he can get at least a small amount of money. He gets on one of the buses, which moves towards his house. Leaning his forehead against the window of the bus, Andy looks at the city with a sad look. It seems to him that everyone around him is doing something useful, and only he is not succeeding. Continuing to drive the minibus in his own way, the hero listens to the radio, which is installed inside the cabin. According to it, a beautiful female voice talks about the chemical industrial company KG, which has a large number of employees both in the country and abroad. They produce almost everything, from batteries to industrial and even pharmaceutical products. Continuing to listen to the advertisement, the hero feels the vibration of his phone in his pocket. He wanted to ignore the notification, but the messages kept coming to his phone. It was his brother. He asked Andy if he left the cake for their mother outside and why he didn't go inside. To which Andy replied that he didn't want his mother to see him like this. But he couldn't help but congratulate her on the holiday. His brother sent him another message, which came to his home email, which said that the hero must pay off the loan debt. Checking his balance, Andy saw a disappointing amount there, because it wasn't even enough to pay off the rent he owed. The hero begins to rummage through his pockets, hoping to find at least some money there. However, he finds only a pill there, which he took with him, because he has not yet fully decided to take it. Looking at the tablet, the hero remembers the person who handed it to him. He handed it under the pretext of the protagonist's large debts. He explained that all the hero had to do was drink it and tell them about its effects, and if everything went well, Andy would never have to think about money again. Now Andy is in such a state that even if this pill kills him, he will not be very upset because death is better than such a worthless life. Therefore, without a doubt, he swallows this medicine. He has no other choice. After the hero takes the medicine, he feels like a million different chemical reactions are happening inside his body, as if he himself had become a small laboratory. At this moment, he has a hallucination. And he feels that someone is trying to strangle him, but he cannot resist this. In front of him, he sees the silhouette of a man in a gas mask who is trying to extract information from him about the location of the medicine, to which Andy replies that he no longer has the pill because he just took it. The man in the gas mask tells the hero that if he doesn't want to get a hole in his skull, he must tell him the formula. After which, the hero wakes up, looking at the reflection of his phone. He does not understand whether it was a dream or reality. Taking the drug left a mark on his appearance. His eyes became very red and his skin became much paler. Despite all his physical weakness, Andy feels that he does not want to sleep at all, as if some chains were binding his brain. At that moment, a new notification arrived on his phone. Andy was surprised by this, because it was already late at night. The message was sent from an unknown number. The unknown person asked him if he had taken the drug, and if he was sleeping now. When Andy answered positively to all the questions, the man invited the hero to meet, which greatly interested the hero. It was already late at night on the street. Only light could be seen in a few windows of multi-story buildings. Under cover of darkness, Andy approached the location indicated by the person who sent the message to his number. While checking his location with the required location, the hero notices a suspicious car not far from him. The man in the car flashed his high beams at Andy, showing him where he should go. Hesitating for a second, Andy wonders if he should go there, since it might not be safe. However, he decides that he has nothing to lose and starts moving towards the car. He approaches the driver's side window, in which absolutely nothing was visible, and tries to address this man. At this moment, the passenger door to the front seat opens in the car, again showing the hero what he needs to do. The hero gets into the car, and at first only looks around thoughtfully, trying to understand what is happening to him. Having come to his senses a little, he sees a woman in the driver's seat, sorting through some papers. The woman introduced herself. Her name is Sophie, and she is a senior researcher at KG. This fact greatly surprised the main character, because he did not expect that the person who sent him these messages was such an unusual woman. Seeing an attractive girl in front of him, Andy was a little confused, but Sophie immediately began asking him questions. The first thing she asked was a question about the protagonist's sleep. Namely, whether Andy was able to fall asleep after taking the drug, to which the hero answered in the negative. After which, Sophie began to examine Andy for any external changes, which made the hero even more embarrassed. But the girl did not back down, and continued to question the hero in between. She told him to contact her as Dr. Sophie. Considering the main character's lifestyle, he rarely had to communicate with girls, especially those who occupy such high positions. So this whole conversation is very difficult for him. But for Sophie, on the contrary, everything is going as it should. Now she has reached the key question, namely whether Andy has recently undergone treatment in the hospital. Based on the results of the examination at this clinic, it was revealed that Andy's body is one of the few that responds to the drug AF12. Andy asks Sophie why she chose this particular time for the meeting, in response to which he heard that this was due to the way the drug worked. Sophie explains that the drug AF12 consists of 2 protein cells, one of which is a powerful sleep stimulant, and the other is a chemical compound containing specific knowledge. All this is studied by the science of molecular biology, and he was chosen to see if he fit the test conditions. Hearing such complex concepts as molecular biology and chemical elements, Andy's eyes darkened because he understood absolutely nothing. Sophie looked at him as if he were still a 1-year-old child and said that she would now explain everything more clearly. The AF12 drug molecule consists of 2 structures that are opposite to each other. In chemistry, this concept is called optical isomers or chirality. In general, everything works quite simply. If a person does not fit the conditions of the drug, then a sleep stimulant will work. And if he does, then an element with knowledge. But such explanations drove the protagonist's brain into an even greater dead end. His intellectual abilities had never been so strained lately. He is trying with all his might to concentrate and understand who he is, and why he is here, not to mention some kind of chirality. Andy asks why they want him to stay awake then, since the knowledge element clearly didn't work on him, to which Sophie replies that he has a very bad opinion of himself. And if you think about it a little, and he will immediately understand everything. Andy leans back imposingly and asks Sophie what kind of optical isomers we are talking about. As far as he knows, these are chemical compounds that contain knowledge. Suddenly, the timbre of his voice changes sharply and Andy screams loudly, saying that this is all complete nonsense. After all, recording information at the molecular level includes genetic engineering, biology, and even the human genome. In addition, identifying the knowledge secreted in a gene is impossible without a sequencing device in the head. Sophie tries to keep the conversation going and answers that indeed, this is usually impossible. Andy begins to explain to Sophie about DNA, RNA, and molecular sequencing, and why none of this is scientific and sounds like real science fiction. Suddenly, he realizes that the drug really worked, because he had never even attended a chemistry lecture before. Sophie looked at Andy with a satisfied look. She realized that the experiment was a success. After which, she began to rummage through some documents, hastily trying to find something important. At this point, Andy notices that he now does not experience any stress while being with a woman, although this was a big problem before. Finally, Sophie has found what she was looking for. and she tells Andy that the knowledge that pops into his head is only a small part of the whole picture. After which, she places a certain container with a round colored substance on the panel of the car. Andy examines it carefully. It seems to him that this element is somehow similar to the pill he took. And so it turned out that this substance is the original of the drug AF12. With its help, you can obtain a wider range of knowledge. The first question that arose in the already quite intelligent person was whether this drug was dangerous to health. But Sophie assured Andy that the drug was 100% safe. After that, Andy asked Sophie what they were going to do with him if he took this drug, perhaps experiments on the human body. And also, he immediately thought about dissection, which led him to a moment of horror. He tries to carefully question his new acquaintance, because when he took this drug, he was an ordinary stupid idiot, but now he understands everything perfectly. However, Sophie interrupts him and says that she is hiring him. The word work worked as a trigger for Andy, because for so long, he had dreamed of getting a job somewhere, and now he was finally given such an opportunity. Moreover, this is not just a job, but work in one of the largest companies in Japan, KG Laboratory. Andy looked at Sophie with an incredulous look. He understands that this offer is too generous. However, he cannot refuse it because he must pay his debts. So he agrees to this offer. After the end of the rapid brain activity, Andy is finally able to fall asleep. In a dream, he sees pillars of fire surrounding his body. The hero is very scared because he is still just a child and a terrible fire has formed around him. Andy is hungry. His whole body hurts terribly. He does not understand who he is, where he is, and why he is here. All he can say is the 4 letters that first came to his mind. The word Dad. After this, Andy wakes up and realizes that it was just a nightmare. Despite this, his body was covered in cold, sticky sweat, and his brain was still in a state of terror. After some time, the hero manages to come to his senses, and he was able to tear his body, shackled by horror, from the bed. However, he cannot remember what he dreamed, and all that remains in his head is yesterday's conversation with Sophie. He remembers that yesterday he finally signed a contract, which, as usual, he threw carelessly on the table, like all his other things. Before opening it, Andy tries to remember how the conversation with Sophie went, because at first he reacted negatively to her proposal. However, Sophie was persistent. She didn't even need to convince the hero, but just look at him with her deep gaze. Looking into her eyes, Andy realizes that he is refusing a good offer because he has been looking for a job for so long. After which, Sophie puts the upstart in his place, telling him that until recently, he barely graduated from a 2-year college. After which, he could not get a job. But they will gladly accept him into their ranks because they need a special person who will be affected by the drug AF12. After carefully reading his contract, Andy realizes that his annual salary will be about 100 million. Seeing such numbers, Andy immediately changed his mind because such money would be able to cover all his needs and would also help his family maintain their store. However, if the hero cannot withstand the peculiarities of the job and quits it, he will have to compensate for all the damage to the company's budget spent on manufacturing the drug and paying his salary. Andy understands that if he eats this drug now, there will be no turning back. But after weighing all the pros and cons, the hero decides to take a risk and take this drug, hoping that there will be no side effects from it. The action is again transferred to our time. Looking at his phone, Andy sees that a transfer of 10 million has been made to his account. In addition to financial changes, the hero sees that his appearance has changed significantly. In particular, the color of his hair has changed. The hero even begins to somewhat doubt the safety of this drug, because he does not understand how hair color can change in a day. But some change in his body bothered him even more. This concerns his eyes, which now have a burgundy tint and begin to see more than normal vision can. With this vision, Andy is able to see every cell that surrounds him. They are visible before his eyes like space. Making his way through his many thoughts, the hero remembers the rest of the conversation with Sophie. He remembers that his view changed yesterday, when he began to consider the cosmetics on Sophie's face as a collection of chemical elements. Then he did not yet understand what this meant. On Sophie's face, he saw the elements of iron, oxygen, silicon, and many others. Sophie didn't like that this impudent boy was looking at her so intently, and she made a displeased grimace. However, Andy did not stop. The neural connections in his head connected the elements into chemical compounds, showing him the complete chemical picture. A silicon molecule combines with oxygen to form silicon oxide, and the oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide atoms form glycolic acid. So Andy learned for the first time a new formula that matched the anti-wrinkle cream that Sophie uses. In response to this, Sophie told Andy that she was still young and did not use wrinkle cream. However, now it is impossible to deceive Andy because he sees everything perfectly. Sophie tells him that he has stopped looking at the face of the girl who has been working 7 days a week for several days. But Andy doesn't seem to hear her. Having received such an amazing ability, he wants to examine every little thing that surrounds him. Andy asks Sophie what specific knowledge and secrets are hidden in this drug he just took. To which Sophie replied that only one person, an authoritative microbiologist, could give the answer to this. She herself does not know the structure of the drug and the features of its action because she is a medical professional, not a scientist. Then Andy says that he would like to meet the one who made him like this and ask him a couple of questions. However, Sophie reminds him that his job is to act on the terms of the signed agreement and succeed in what he is told. Looking closely into her eyes, Andy replied that the problem with rough skin cannot be removed only by the shimmer effect. She must come up with some other way, for example, adding some kind of catalyst that will be used to remove the aging skin surface. After which, Sophie slams her hand on the steering wheel of the car, telling Andy to shut up, otherwise he will fire him. Hearing this phrase, Andy finally shut up. The action moves again to our time, where Andy leaves the house after completing his morning routine. On the porch of his apartment, Andy sees a man whom he had avoided for so long and was afraid to see even in a nightmare. The hostess stood there. She crossed her arms displeasedly and asked the hero where he was going and whether it had anything to do with the interview. Having learned that he was not going to a job interview, the landlady said that she was already tired of the fact that the hero could not pay the rent, so she would evict him if he did not pay right away. Andy tells the grumpy woman that she'll get what she came for, before taking out his phone and logging into the bank's app. A few seconds later, the hostess's mood changed dramatically, because Andy transferred her the amount several months in advance. Seeing that the transfer was successful, Andy tells her in a calm voice that it is time for him to go. The hostess timidly thanked the hero because she had already forgotten when she received money from him and finally decided to ask where he was going early in the morning. Andy smiled back at her and said that he finally got a job. In order to get to work, Andy chose the city train because it goes right to the station where the laboratory is located. At such a time, there were a lot of people on the train because they were all rushing to their work. Wanting to stay in such a large flow of people, Andy tries to grab the handrail near the door. However, he immediately receives an electric shock to his palm and abruptly pulls it back. The blow was quite painful. Andy even had to shake his palm several times before the discomfort disappeared. Looking at his hand, Andy notices interesting changes on it. First, he is now able to examine it in detail, so close that he can see every nodule and line in his palm. Moreover, he now sees the soft light of free electrons, which looks like fine dust, as if it were a cosmic canvas of myriads of stars. He sees that these small specks of dust seem to want to fly away from his palm somewhere, but the positive charge attracts them. Then Andy firmly grabs the metal handrail inside the train to test one of his theories. His guesses were confirmed. After contact with the metal, electrons began to move to a more positively charged object. Andy says goodbye to them as if he were his buddies, and tells them after them not to cluster in one place and create static tension. However, some of the electrons are still stuck to the main character, and he clumsily tries to disperse them. This is noticed by some passengers on the train who looked at the hero as if he were crazy. In response to this, Andy simply looked up and pretended that nothing had just happened. Seeing his reflection in the mirror, the hero hopes that the rest of the employees will receive him well, despite his disheveled hair and cheap clothes. Continuing to observe the movement of dust particles, Andy notices that some of them are beginning to accumulate chaotically in various places. This fact interested Andy very much, because he had never noticed such behavior in electrons before. Some of them, without any reason, accumulate on passengers' clothes, and some even freely accumulate in the air, forming something similar to flakes of silk. If you rub them a little against some object, you can hear a slight rustle, and if you collect even more of them, you can even cause a spark. Therefore, Andy disperses them with his palm, so that an accident does not happen inside the cabin. The dust particles continued their movement. Some of them were chaotically scattered throughout the cabin, but most rushed into further movement. Andy wondered where the electrons would go this time, and if it had anything to do with charge or action. Entering the next carriage, Andy sees a pretty girl there about his age, reading some document. Dust particles from electrons surround her young body. In this form, she seems even more attractive, because the electrons seem to emphasize her beauty. Andy cannot take his eyes off her, and despite his outstanding intelligence, he still loses to ordinary hormones. This is not surprising, because in addition to beauty, the hero sees something else in her. Because now there are so few girls who read scientific literature while sitting on the train. He sees that too many electrons have clung to her, creating a small charge and electrolyzing her hair to the metal railing. Judging by their number, a certain object or thing from her wardrobe strongly attracts a negative charge to itself. At this moment, the enjoyment of the beauty of this girl is interrupted by a child crying throughout the salon whom his mother is desperately trying to calm down. Other passengers also pay attention to the baby's crying because it greatly irritates their nervous system. Some of them even reprimand the mother, telling her to calm her child down as soon as possible. However, this is not as easy to do as it seems, because often children at this age are capricious without any obvious reason for this. The man sitting next to the child said that both adults and children should know the rules of social etiquette. Otherwise, they should not visit such places. The child looked at the old man with a sad look, as if realizing that he had just insulted both him and his mother. In addition, the old man said that the current political system in Japan is complete rubbish, and if he were in their place, he would ban children from appearing in public places. Hearing this, Andy was very surprised because he had never met such radical people before. He notices that many electrons have accumulated around the child's woolen hat. Andy comes closer and starts waving his hand above his head to get the electrons off the baby because he's already crying. A wave of his hand redirected the flow of electrons towards the grumpy old man, who continued to read his newspaper. Electrons begin to accumulate around his hair, thereby electrifying it, raising the hair upward. The hero notices that a small beam of electrons remains in his palm, and he decides to do something fun. He gestures to the boy to look at the old man's head and himself presents his palm to it. Due to the difference in action potential, electrons from the old man's head begin to be attracted to Andy's palm, thereby raising his hair even higher, exposing his bald spot. Seeing this, Andy was very surprised, because it was as if he controlled the flow of electrons, creating a positive charge in his palm. This may mean that the free electrons are listening to him, because there is not even sodium silicate stuck to his hand, which would allow him to change the charge of his palm. At this moment, the gloomy old man notices that something wrong is happening to his head, and turns his attention to Andy. However, he quickly hid his hands in his pockets and pretended as if nothing had happened. The child also sat quietly and carefully looked at Andy, who hid his hands in his pockets. Andy motioned to him not to say a word, and then he would show him such a trick again. For a moment, his palm changed to a positive pole, then changed to a negative pole again. Theoretically, this is possible. After all, when your hair stands on end from fear, this is also a kind of bioelectric reaction that is transmitted to the senses. Assuming Andy could control this signal, he could induce a tiny burst of energy in his palm. Andy tries to reproduce this charge on his palm and transfers his brain impulses there. Andy does it very well. Free electrons begin to accumulate around his palm in large quantities. The hero immediately decides to test his new ability, and again puts his palm to the head of the grumpy old man. Due to the difference in charges, the hair begins to be attracted to Andy's palm with even greater force than before. In surprise, the child covered his mouth so as not to laugh throughout the whole bus and attract the old man's attention. The other passengers also noticed this, and it amused them, removing the gloomy grimace from their faces after the boy's prolonged crying. Andy didn't even notice that one of the passengers was filming his prank on his phone. The loudspeaker inside the train announced the name of one of the stations where the old man got off. And now the kid can laugh out loud. He tells Andy that he liked his tricks. The man who was filming his trick on his phone approached Andy from behind and asked him a question. The hero heard a female voice behind him. It was that beautiful girl. She asked Andy if he was going to the KG laboratory now. It turned out that this girl also worked in this laboratory, and on her ID, it was written that she was a junior researcher named Chloe. The train continued its further movement to the final station. One of the trains inside the tunnel touched a beam from which one of the holding screws flew off. After the loss of tightness and strength of the spare part, several more screws immediately flew off from it. The action returns inside the train cabin. It turned out that everyone in the laboratory was aware of the appearance of the newcomer because he was recommended by a very famous scientist. Hearing this, Andy did not like the fact that everyone in the company would know about his imminent appearance because this could cause unnecessary trouble. He is also concerned about the large accumulation of electrons around Chloe. The amide bonds are so dense that there is a high probability of aggregation of electrical charges. Chloe was wearing nylon stockings, sodium, silicon, oxygen. All this combines into sodium silicate, in other words, into Wa-style, which can cause an explosion. Therefore, it is necessary to neutralize the ions first. All he has to do is sprinkle water on it, and the effect will not be long in coming. Chloe comes even closer to the hero. She wants to get to know the newcomer better and tells him that white hair is very unusual. She reaches out to the handrail and tells him that the firm doesn't have a dress policy, but he could have worn something smarter for the first meeting. After touching the handrail, Chloe gets electrocuted by high static voltage, and Andy tells her to be careful. Andy tries to calm the girl down, but she says she's fine. That's why she doesn't like winter, because she has to wear clothes that can cause static tension in contact with her. But there's one thing she can't explain: how Andy knew that she was going to get an electric shock right now. Andy just turned his head to the side to come up with some other excuse, however. Chloe continued to ask her questions. At that moment, the train entered a tunnel at the base of which there were many metal beams. The train driver noticed that there was an unreliable fastening in one of the places and told all passengers to take a stable position. Several metal beams collapsed right in front of their train, and the driver began to apply emergency braking. The beams completely blocked the railway for transport, and it became impossible to continue moving. Meanwhile, unsuspecting passengers continued to communicate with each other. Chloe, with burning eyes, wants to ask the main character as much as possible about the current and electrical induction that he used on the old man. However, due to the sharp braking of the train, strong vibrations began inside the cabin, which interrupted the conversation of two new acquaintances. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe for more. Comment your thoughts below. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to turn on notifications to catch the next part. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.